So good evening, everyone. I am pleased to be chairing my first council session of the new council term. I would like to open the District Suit Committee of the Whole meeting. May I please have someone move the motion? Thank you. And then we're going to add new business supplementary to the package, which is the yellow sheet that we've all received. And I would like approval of our agenda, please. Thank you. All in favor? Thanks. So we have the mayor also asked me to make notice of a form that she passed off to me in regards to the British Columbia Community Achievements Awards. Am I allowed to just make a few comments to that right now? She just wanted the public to be aware of it, that the nomination deadline was January 15th, and to look online if you wish to nominate someone. Thank you. And now we have our council committees, and am I going to have a staff report on this, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff was asked to provide a history on past advisory committees, which has been provided, and the terms of reference that we had in place have also been provided, which were affordable housing, climate change, community grant review, development and land use, finance and administration, fire commission, land use and environment, long-term financial planning, parks and trails, the Suit Community Center Advisory Committee, and the Suit Program of the Arts. As you're aware, the Suit Program of the Arts and the Affordable Housing Committees are still operational. Everything else was terminated in 2016, I believe, and a new structure was discussed at that time. Unfortunately, all we've been able to locate were that verbal updates were provided to council at that time, and we haven't been able to find any physical reports to provide you any background on that. But there was some supplementary information that was found on the proposed committee structure, which has been provided to you in the yellow documents. So I don't know if council was planning to have any discussion this evening around any specifics. We have also provided a template recommended for terms of reference when considering any new advisory committees. That's all provided for council to think about. If you want to recommend striking up any new committees, we can certainly work with you to develop those terms of reference and what specifically they would be responsible for. And then once that comes forward, I'm assuming that will be in the new year, create the committees and adopt the terms of reference, and then we would proceed with advertising to fill those vacancies. But we would also like to ensure that we are able to provide sufficient staff report for those advisory committees. Unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mishada. Does council have any questions they'd like to ask in regards to this? Tony?
Through your worship. Question for staff. You mentioned that there might be some limitations in terms of staff resources, in terms of the number of committees. Do you have a rough idea?
From providing an administrative support for advisory committees, I believe we have the capacity to have 4 committees with our current staffing levels. I think we can accommodate that within our working structure, but dependent, again, also on other resources that you would need, whether that comes from bylaw, planning, engineering. Most of those groups, I think, have been working along with the affordable housing, as a lot of the things they do are impacted there. But I think we just have to see how many committees and what the nature of those are before we'd reasonably be able to answer that.
Is this based on, sorry, through your worship, is this based on meeting in the evenings? And would it make any difference if meetings happen during the day?
I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of relevant work that goes together with putting together the agendas and creating the minutes. It's not just the attendance at the meeting. That's a very small portion of that work. But
thank you.
Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so here we are in a committee, right? This is the committee of the whole. Now, I'm curious. I've always thought, I don't see a public comment portion of this evening. These meetings, as I understand it, are opportunities to discuss loosely outside of the formal council context. Say hello? You're right. Okay, I withdraw that. Okay.
Does anyone else have any other questions in regards to this?
Yeah.
Councillor Bateman, follow-up?
So in terms of, I notice in the proposed, the terms of reference that on page 15, that there is a guarantee of staff support. The District of Suit will provide a recorder who, at the direction of the committee chair. So that would involve at least one staff person at each committee.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. I mean, I guess we're providing this terms of reference as the ideal.
Right.
And then again, dependent on how many committees council is interested in creating. As I mentioned, I think from an administrative support role, we can accommodate 4 advisory committees. I know we have 2 that are currently operating without, just because of the issues that were going on at the time they were created. So that really only leaves 2 more that we can currently accommodate. I mean, there's certainly things we can look at throughout the organization, but again, I think we just need to know specifically what those are, when they're going to plan on meeting, and the subject matter, and then we can look at other opportunities.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Mushada. So with all the different committees that we've had over the years, and when they were canceled, a number of them came back into being, and we did it without having staff support. So we did our own minutes and brought all the information forward. It's easier to have staff support if your meetings are during the daytime, because then the staff is here and it's part of their daily work schedule. If we do it during the evening, then that comes as added expense. So the committees that you decide to be on, it's good to decide when you want to have your meetings and whether you're willing to do some of the work on your own.
I was mostly wondering, based on, I mean, we have our terms of reference, we have a number of committees, we have different structures. So, for example, a number of committees were eliminated in order to have 3 standing committees that would take up all the work. That didn't make its way through the process. At this point, we have 2 committees that we've agreed to move forward on. Tonight, at this point in time, we're accepting a report. Other than accepting the report, are we at this time going to be discussing other committees that we'd like to see put into place? Are we looking at the pre-existing committees and looking at which ones to bring forward? What's the intent beyond accepting the report this evening? Do you know, or am I?
I was going to say through your worship. Sorry. So when we come to committee of the whole, the committee of the whole is for all of us to sit around the table, discuss what we have here, speak freely about it, decide what we would like to see and what we would like to do. So if you have any committees that you would like to see, we will bring this forward when we receive this. It will go to staff to present something back to us at a later date. So if you have a committee that you would like to see come forward, now's a really good time to do that. I have a couple of questions myself on a number of these items, which I will ask right now, I think. So on page 16, or page 15, 16 at the top for the select committee. So it states that a committee it's right at the very top of the page, the second line. It says, a committee volunteer must be a resident or own a business in the District of Sault. Does that pertain to all of our committees? It's, page 16 of 54 at the very top. B, it is. It's for select committees.
Again, this is just a suggestion. We can review the terms of reference that we've provided as a template overall to make them look the same for all of our committees. Again, this is just to
Right.
get some
It's for
discussion happening.
Yeah. That's all good. So, and then, so we would be able to look at what we would like to change on a number of these items. So, then that answers my question on 21, and then 23. So on page 23, it's for the Climate Action Committee. I know these are just samples, but this is what we've done in previous years, so it's just coming forward. So we could make changes to these, and so that you would have the council representative appointed by council, which is Tony, right? And then the chairperson is to be selected by the committee. And so I don't know how you all feel, but I think that the person that's appointed by the council should be the person chairing the meeting, knowing the rules and regulations of what's going on, being able to report back to council. If you have to do the minutes like I've done previously, you'd be able to do it without having someone else do it.
Thank you, Your Worship. The ones that you're referencing for the Climate Action Change Committee, those were the terms of reference that were in place in 2009 when things were done a little differently. Again, if they wanted to reenact this specific committee, we would look at taking this information and formatting it into the terms of reference template that we've proposed. And I think, if there may be specific exceptions, but I think as a whole we would want to keep the council member as the chair for their own specific interest of their advisory committee, but of course we can consider those individually.
Thank you. So, Tony? Councillor St. Pierre?
Just in terms of the Climate Action Committee, I did notice that I believe it was strictly for the district, so it was essentially looking at the district as a business, reducing its carbon, as opposed to the district as a whole. Also, I'm on the in terms of the Climate Change Committee that was there in the past. If I read the terms of reference properly, and I think I did, it was really about trying to reduce carbon for the municipality as these buildings and what we do as a business in some ways, and not actually the district as a whole. So that was one thing. The other thing is I'm actually on the Climate Action Intermunicipal Task Force, not this one, but so those would be the two things. I do think that we should, if we're talking about having committees, I think a Climate Action Committee would be appropriate. So I'm going to throw that out as well.
Councillor Loggins?
Thank you. A few just comments, I suppose. I believe Councillor Bateman was on the chair.
That is absolutely right. I was going to address some of Tony's questions there, but go ahead.
Of the Climate Change Action Committee, and that was staffed well, of course, because it was mostly for staff. But I thought it was a wonderful committee, and I'm sure Councillor Bateman had the same sentiment. Because it felt like we got a lot done and that staff were really engaged in things that we could be doing better, not only for our organization but also for the district, although there was a large focus on the organization itself so that we could be leaders for the community. And one thing to consider as well when councillors are choosing to chair a meeting is that if there is no staff support, it is very difficult to chair and record minutes. So if you do have a chair who's capable, such as Councillor Bateman, look where he is now, all that experience, then it can be beneficial. I think it just depends on the committee, really. So that could be something to consider for the terms of reference, depending on what committee you choose to have. And then also the 3 standing committees that were brought forward after the others were closed, that was more like almost an attempt to please the council of the day. So it's not necessarily that's, I guess it was just an attempt is the best word I can use to describe it, because things were just not going well, and that's kind of why we fumbled around with no committees for quite a while. So I'm fine either way. I don't really have a preference over if we, split it into only 3 so that we can manage in terms of staffing, and then perhaps branch out with a couple select ones or however we want to do it. But I just thought I'd give a bit of history in terms of that. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention is that I certainly feel in the community there is space for a youth advisory committee, although I can understand how that one perhaps wouldn't be staffed and perhaps would also be in the evening to accommodate the schedules of youth. But it's something I'll perhaps revise the terms of reference from the previous one and see if I can make it fit a bit better and bring something forward at a later date, because I believe it would have to work with the school year as well to gather some more motivation. So perhaps it's something that could be started next fall. But there's definitely youth in the community who would be interested in assisting us at a municipal level and who have the capacity to do so, although perhaps not a committee where we would require staff. I'm not really sure. Another thing to consider, though, in terms of youth is trying to acquire them for your committee and reaching out to the schools and teachers and friends to see if you can get anyone interested in being on your committee or having one of the stakeholders of your committee in the terms be a youth as well.
Thank you, Councillor Loggins. Councillor Bateman.
Yes, thank you. Through you, your chair. Through you, your chair. No, that's not going to work. Through you, your worship. Yes, the Climate Change Action Committee. Thank you for bringing that up immediately. To answer Councillor St. Pierre's question, it worked with the district's climate, energy, and emissions plan. It did focus on municipal activities, and by the time I'd arrived, it had reached municipal operations were net zero. Under my watch, with people like Laura Hooper and Chief Sorensen was part of that group, and Brent Blackhall and Patty Rear, who comes from I think it was Port Moody. She brings a whole bunch of climate direct experience of application on a municipal level. We were talking about things like working with the First Nation, solar farms, a local compost facility, also yard waste. There's all sorts of localized issues that I feel that committee can do good work with. And yes, I was looking at these proposed umbrella committees, which seem to make a lot of sense. Arts and culture, for example. I know SPA doesn't necessarily deal with music and arts and the actual. It does. Okay. All right.
All of it.
Okay. So you're covered. I see the first need would be an OCP steering committee as we move forward into next year. And my other thought was a communications task force so that we can figure out how to more effectively communicate what's going on in this chamber and out to the public. And that could involve any number of things. Newsletters, e-bulletins, more press releases, social media, regularly scheduled speed dates, as we did during the campaign, involving staff and council. Yeah, so I have a number of others, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Councillor Beddoes.
Through your worship, now I've got the list of all these ones we've done before, and it's quite lengthy. We're going to boil it down to 3, correct? So, 4, yeah. So, I mean, under community development, can we strike a subcommittee out of that to look at the OCP, or would it have to be done with that one committee as a whole? My concern is when you lump all this into 3, we could be overburdening ourselves. Is that a reasonable question? I guess.
Ms. Machado.
Thank you, through your worship. Certainly, we can create the terms of reference to accommodate any of those things, and we can allow them to strike subcommittees to deal with specific issues. That's something that's completely possible.
Yeah, I guess my concern with what Councillor Bateman was saying about the OCP, which is a pretty high priority in my books, and I'm sure in his too. So certainly want to see that addressed. Thanks.
Councillor Loggins.
Thanks. Just really quickly, one of the things that we can consider as well is the timing of the committee. So, for instance, the affordable housing one is technically meeting every month, but we also have the option for the call of the chair. So we actually met twice a month, well, bi-weekly, for the past few months. So if it is the case where it's something that needs to be done right away, we can crunch that timeline, but perhaps it's, bringing back the Climate Change Action Committee, we could do that quarterly, right? So it doesn't have to be something that's always taking up staff time, but it could. So in that note, we can go beyond having 4, really, if we organize them correctly, based on their need.
Thank you, Councillor Loggins. Anyone else have any questions at the table?
I just wanted to confirm this number 4 is actually. I mean, we're looking at potentially 4, but it's not. It's not in stone. It's not in concrete. Councillor Loggins has made it clear that we can potentially operate, the way that Councillor Bateman was, with someone to provide support. And there's a lot of talent in the community. If there's a need, I think we can actually, strike the necessary number of committees. So we're not actually limited to 4. Having said that, I have an interest in a transportation committee that could probably be called the Route 14 Committee or something. I'm interested in potentially having a local economic development committee that might work with the EDG and the Chamber of Commerce and various other organizations on the local economy and trying to diversify it as quickly as possible. So those are just two possible committees where we might want to engage the public and get as much talent in the room as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Machada.
Thank you, Worship. So I guess 2 things on that is from a record-keeping perspective and our duty under legislation to maintain those and other things, we are not recommending that we don't have staff support, so whatever that looks like. And I think that also just does become an employment issue for the municipality if we start using other people to do that work. So, not.
Councillor Bateman?
I had a thought on this. The staffing situation is that there's very competent people gather in these committees. And is it possible that they can self-organize for the first hour and 45 of a meeting, and then a staff person would come, the recorder you refer to here, would arrive in the final 15 minutes to formally document the outcomes from that particular meeting? And this will not overly impact on staff time, and it will empower and,
Through.
I think your worship is looking.
Through your worship. I think if we develop some procedures and parameters around the types of discussion that occurred, that might be something that we consider. That I think that's something that's kind of outside the box. I've never heard of that happening before, but I think it's something we could certainly investigate.
Keep Souk weird. I think that was one of.
Any other questions? Comments? Councillor St. Pierre?
I just have to wonder, in terms of the staff input, does the staff generally, and I understand that if it was an engineering-related or planning-related sort of committee, that the staff would be expected to provide expertise, but it sounds like they're generally acting as recorders. Is that correct?
No, it would typically be somebody from corporate services that attends to provide that administrative support. The resource staff that are coming from planning, engineering, bylaw, or whichever department is required would just be attending from the expertise perspective.
Okay. So this would extend beyond taking minutes, I'm assuming?
Sorry, I'm not understanding.
The administrative support would extend beyond just taking minutes.
It's the creation of the agenda, gathering that material, coordinating with the chair, producing the minutes, providing and producing any correspondence that's required, follow up with other departments. So essentially,
Boni. Thank you.
Everything.
Thank you. Just want to lay it all out.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Councillor Bateman?
Well, I should take this opportunity to just read into the record the various other committees that Tony's mentioned: the Economic Development Advisory Commission, a Farmland Advisory Board, the Youth Advisory Select Committee, as Councillor Logans has suggested. And incidentally, I went to my first age-friendly committee meeting last week. And apparently age-friendly is not strictly related to our elders. It's as Mrs. Logan said at the meeting, it's very much a mandate to cover all ages in Souk. So it's possible, given that the age-friendly committee has staffing from Christine Bossy, paid staff, that the youth committee could report through that or be supported by that age-friendly committee, potentially. Okay. All right. Also, the Farmland Advisory and potentially an Advisory Planning Commission. However, I feel all of this should wait until we have our CAO hired and we're in a position to bring these things forward.
So we would not want to wait in case it takes 6 months or longer, and then for the whole year we accomplish nothing. So we have our committees, you have the ones that you would like to be on, so you can name many committees, but if no one wants to sit on them from council, those committees won't exist.
I just would like to move the motion and suggest that rather than sort of going through like the minutia of all the rules of the meetings and every sort of group that we could think of, rather than making those decisions tonight, that perhaps we put together a list and send it forward and prioritize in strategic planning rather than going through it in intense detail tonight.
Sorry, just before you do that, I think it would be proper to have your public input prior to making the motion in case that changes what you might want to move.
Thank you, Ms. Machada. I was going to do that. And the reason why we have committee of the whole is so that we can sit here and that we can all discuss what we want before we do make a recommendation, so that it's all out there and staff have an idea of where we would like to go. So does anybody else at the table have another question before it is open to the public?
I just have to, I forgot to mention the Land Use and Development Committee, and I'm sure this has been mentioned, perhaps, but just to keep that, I've heard from a number of people very eager to see that continue.
So that would be one of the mayor's committees that she formulates and not council as such. So I would like to ask any of the public if they would like to come up and have a word on any of this, on any committees or structure or whatever you feel is important.
Lures. That I found very interesting. It's good information to have about the staffing and all that, and having been served on committees as well, and serving with staffing and without staffing. But if the OCP, I'm just trying to put it together because of the lack of staffing for all the committees, we have the OCP review committee. We could possibly incorporate some of the roundtable discussions for some of the committee groups. So you could have perhaps, you were talking about the farm task group, community spaces, arts groups. They could be part of the discussion, because when you're discussing the OCP takes in all those things, affordable housing too. So you have roundtable discussions at the OCP, and you have different groups coming in, and the committee can be large. It can be 20 people, the OCP committee, and it could incorporate some of those people as well, because then you get a better feeling for the OCP, how to put it together. The Land Use and Development Committee, as you said, needs to be a separate committee. The Economic Development would have to be a separate committee, but it still should be a part of the discussion with the OCP, because they all feed into the OCP. So that would be a way of maybe moving forward in that way, so that you have the one large committee, and then you have roundtable discussions. I've been to a couple. When we first incorporated, we had them, roundtable discussions. So this room was full of round tables, and people go around from table to table, and it was good. And our OCP review, we did the same thing. And it really is good because you get a lot of feedback, and I think you did that with Lot A, too. You had that kind of discussion. So it's just a thought that you might want to look at instead of having a whole lot of committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis.
Jen Smith, 6805 Courts Drive. Merry Christmas in case I forget to say it later. First of all, I'd like to recommend that you have an area planning commission under the provincial statutes. I think that I've always felt that SUC is pretty backwards for not having one. It will relieve a lot of the pressure from council in terms of the length of your meetings. It doesn't take away any of their power or your authority, but it does give it gives both the applicants and the public a good chance to air out the proposed development and provide input into it, and to assist the developer as well in finding out what might be more acceptable to the community. Then maybe you'll find that you won't have as much objection within the community. You do see a lot of people who are going to argue against an application when it comes forward to council. But what you're also not seeing, or maybe you are, within the community itself, even if once the development has been approved, because nobody feels heard, there's a lot of resentment against council, and there's a big division within our community, and has been for all this time. And you find in the communities that have the area planning commissions, there's less of that, because the developer has more of an opportunity to kind of tailor his development to get it to. Of course, sometimes you're never going to get a development application potentially that everybody loves in the neighborhood, but they'll get some things out of it that will make it a little bit more acceptable to them. We've been against that in SUC, on SUC councils the whole time, but we have a really fractured community as a result. So I would strongly urge, and I'm a little, disappointed that it wasn't included in one of the options in the staff report, because that's huge, right? Most communities do have one. So that being said, I have sat on a committee as a member of the public, and we did have staff support for that. We also had sitting councillors, and I've been on committees as a councillor as well, not being the chair, wishing I had been the chair. It was a pet project of mine. So I've had community chairs who were elected, or actually they were always appointed. So I really like the idea of the chair being elected from within the committee. I do think, with regards to the minutes and the staff support, what we did on committees is we would ask for staff for a particular item if we wanted some information on it. The most important thing that you need to remember, which I didn't hear anything of in your discussion, is what these committees are supposed to do. It's not for councillors to work on their pet projects, although, certainly you should be involved in the committees where you have interest. It's you identify what is needed in the community, and then you're seeking public input. It's all a chance for public input to have a say in what happens in the community. So with that being the reason, you want to select committees that will be of a lot of importance, and you want to make sure that they have minutes, but it doesn't have to be staff report. You want to make sure that they have some autonomy over over what they decide to do. I didn't like hearing that if they had an hour and a half of a meeting before staff was present to record it, that they would have to have that discussion under parameters set by staff. There's something wrong with that thinking, because staff shouldn't be setting the agenda. The chair should set the agenda, with the based out of discussions that happen in the committee. And I would like the minutes to be required. It could be somebody from the committee, like in the nonprofit situation, we asked for somebody to record minutes. And if you can't get somebody to record minutes, well, then maybe you see what staff is available. I'd like to suggest that we've always had committees, except for in 2016 and 17. And how many committees have we had? And we were able to have staff for it. So I think it's an artificial constraint that staff resources should be the priority. The priority is public consultation. And staff can be directed to make the time for things that are council's priority. So it's council that sets the priorities of staff. The other one thing I want to mention is that it's very important who you get. If you're going to have daytime meetings because of staff, you're missing out on all the commuters in town, all the people, a lot of the people with families, the people who work during the day. So how much public input? You're getting it only from certain sources. So those are the things I would like you to consider, and I strongly recommend, I can't say it enough, about the public, the Area Planning Commission. There's the terms of reference are already there in the government. There's guidelines for it, and you don't have to accept the recommendations, and it will make life a lot easier for you, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anyone else in the public wish to speak? Calling once? No one? May I please have a motion? Ms. Smith? Yes, please.
That council receive the staff report regarding council committees for information.
Moved by Councillor McMath and seconded. Oh, right. No seconders required. No, it just goes forward to the next meeting. Thank you. So we are now moving on to the parking restriction zoning bylaw. And do we have a report this evening or any comments on this? Nothing to bring forward?
Nothing prepared. I think council had just asked for the parking parameters that are provided for in our zoning bylaw. So those have been provided in the report. I'm certainly able to answer any questions.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Not so much questions, but just a comment. Once more, I see in parking regulations section H and 4.8 that there's more references to cash in lieu. I think that what I'm seeing as a pattern is that we receive insufficient cash to actually meet the need that's being bought. So we lose the parking because it's not provided, or insufficient parking is provided, but the money that's provided is not enough for the municipality to solve the problem. So I'm not sure that the cash in lieu is really something that we should be entertaining quite so readily in terms of parking as well.
Do you have a comment or no?
Interesting you mentioned the cash in lieu. I've attempted to find a record of any cash in lieu we've taken in the past. I haven't found that yet. There doesn't seem to be a reserve fund set up for it, and there is no calculation set out for us to go by. So there's nothing to tell us how much and what to value it at, not even in the OCP. And the OCP mentions cash in lieu as well, so good point.
Through your worship, so this means it's probably never happened. Is that about right? Just to confirm?
Through your worship, it does appear that way.
Well, that's good. Yay, us. All right, thank you.
Any Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I assume we're still talking about this, but I was looking at the chart in the back of what other municipalities do. Page 44, 54. And it's missing some things on the left side, but
Visitor.
Yeah, anyways, like for Suit, multifamily, 1.5 units of parking per unit. And I see Langford uses 2.75 for 2-bedroom and 3.75 for 3-bedroom. I would like us to have a look at increasing the requirement for parking at residences, and there's a couple of good reasons. I was touring the neighborhoods today, and somebody, I don't know who took this picture here, but it's yeah, it was fairly common. That there's a great deal of on-the-street parking. And I just happened to talk to the truck driver that was around picking up all the recyclables today, and I asked him for his opinion of what it's like to drive in Souk. And actually, it was surprisingly, he said it really wasn't that bad. Where he does have trouble is when there's a lot of parking on both sides of the streets. So I wonder if any future developments we might consider increasing the amount of parking that has to be supplied at a residence, so we don't get into something like this picture here, which says it all. And that's what I encountered throughout town is when you're parking on both sides of the streets. The other thing is that we might consider, and I just throw this out here, is that for some of these neighborhoods we take the parking off one side of the street and yellow mark that side, so there's only parking on one side of the street, and then we eliminate the need to weave. And today I went down and I had to stop and wait for a car to come through, and then I go through. So either we increase the size of our streets or we restrict the parking on one side. Just a consideration.
Councillor St. Pierre.
In terms of new developments, it occurred to me that if we have the opportunity to put in additional parking, especially visitor parking, and put in an EV hookup so that electric vehicles can actually charge up, and potentially encourage developers to make use of car shares. So if you have a certain number of residents and you have a car share type of operation operating out of a communal parking that's shared by visitors, we could potentially offer less density in terms of parking on the rest of the development, as long as you had some way of actually sharing vehicles and sharing parking spaces.
Councillor Beddoes.
Through your worship to staff, what sort of restrictions do we have now on like boats and things like that parked on the street? Do we have restrictions on that, or is it left up to the individual developments, and a lot of them have their own rules? Do we have any standing bylaws on that?
Through your worship, that would be covered in traffic bylaw. I don't have that in front of me right now. I would say typically it's not permitted in most communities. I assume Souk is the same, but they do have to be certainly licensed, but there is a provision in the zoning bylaw to park recreational vehicles on your property, which leads me to believe that it's probably not permitted.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Councillor Bateman?
I'm hoping to hear from you shortly to tell us why you've brought this forward. But as I understand it, there are a number of hot spots in town. There's just a handful of them. I talked to a couple of our career firefighters the other day, and they identified 4 spots in town, which I won't name, but they get pretty busy. Both sides of the street, on weekends in particular. Mondays are a little easier. And some business owners parking their business vehicles in addition to private vehicles. And they're challenging spots, I guess, for neighbors. And we do have this issue of secondary suites, where we're allowing 1 vehicle per suite, but in the 2-car household, people who are renting suites also have a couple of cars. I've noted in Langford, one of the new streets off the West Shore Parkway called Commander Court, which is just before you get to the smiley face speed warning sign. It has 3 lanes, and one of the lanes is a red paving stones and is dedicated for parking. And we're not a community that really believes in lane parking. So many, I know in our as it states here, in our town center townhouse zone, that will have to be, people have to park around back. And perhaps we could be raising this with developers and suggesting that perhaps there's a way to get cars off the streets and into the... Though we seem to be front-loading in this community. Everyone pulls in to the front of their property and into the garage, ideally. But of course, the garages are often full, as ours is, with stuff. But we only have one car at our place. Anyway, that's it.
Any other comments from council? Councillor Law?
I think most of it's been said. I do completely agree with what Councillor St. Pierre has said, and also wanted to talk a bit more about off-street visitor parking, and perhaps we could have like larger developments create visitor parking areas where they have, you know, I think there's some like around Whiff and Spit that have incorporated some visitor parking, and that has worked out pretty well. I don't know, I mean, I feel for staff on this because it's such a complex issue because it seems to me like we not only have to consider increasing, like I completely agree with Councillor Beddoes about increasing the number of vehicles, parking requirements per multifamily. I would say at least we should be at 2, but that also can impact the size of the lots and the width of the streets and our bylaws in terms of what side of the street we can park on, et cetera, et cetera. So it feels like there's just so much to consider. But I'll leave that in your expert hands. Hopefully we can provide guidance, though, along the way, and perhaps that's where you could maybe offer some advice tonight on how you'd like us to help you frame this.
Through the chair, it's helpful that we're entering into the transportation master plan process. Engagement will start fairly early in the new year. That will then lead into a review of Bylaw 404 and all of our road standards. The image that was provided to you is of Marsden Road, I believe, just off Stonehearth. And that's a small lot local road, so that's typically applied with adjacent small lots, so that would be our small lot district, that's R3. So anything under 350, like around the minimum 350 square meter lots. And so there would be one sidewalk. And typically those would require one stall per every 2 lots for visitor parking. But I'm not sure what happens in the history of these developments, but that's what's in our bylaw for the small lot local. There are opportunities and times when an approving officer can make changes to those requirements based on any number of things, so that may be the case. But yes, the fire department has every right to make a fire lane, like a non-parking area on one side, if they deem it necessary for safety. Other options are in more urban areas. When residents are having an issue, when they're closer to maybe other commercial businesses, maybe closer into our town center, if it's a certain number of residents on a street, they can apply to the local government to make it for permits, parking just for people that live there, that they have to prove it, and then the district provides it free, a pass of some sort that they have to provide. There's enforcement implications for that, of course, but there's a lot of different options. But again, this is a cyclical problem. It's a problem that you want to have in a growing community. Parking is a from a planning perspective, purely, it's a sign of growth that we can widen the roads, widen the driveways, widen the lots, and our CO2, our footprint, environmental footprint goes, way down. So it's really it's a lose-lose scenario. Mm-hmm. But certainly, looking at the comparisons between other municipalities, for our multifamily, like our more dense developments, there's no reason why we couldn't make it based on number of bedroom units. You can see more with those co-housing type developments. There is somewhat underground parking, so I think that could be accommodated. It's the single family, I think, where we're seeing some of the issues. That's a different thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of, thank you very much. That is really helpful. And that's sort of where my mind is going with this, is especially in terms of like the small lot residential, where our lot size is just a tiny hair smaller than Langford's, but then we're also like way more rural in terms of getting to work, right? So we may require additional vehicles, whereas those small lots may be next to a bus stop. So there's just so much to consider, and I hope that the transportation master plan can help us answer some of these questions.
If I can add, one thing I didn't put under the other considerations list there was home-based businesses. I think this is just an observation. I can't bear it out for fact, but I would assume that Souk has a higher number of home-based businesses than areas like Langford or Colwood, and so people tend to have multiple vehicles then. That plays into it with us as well as the secondary suites.
Thank you. Council, any other comments?
Yeah, are we going to be talking not just residential parking, about like downtown parking? Is that all part of it?
That's all in there.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would comment on that is the parking downtown is virtually non-existent unless it's on private property in the malls and things. And my understanding, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong here, that the parking lots down there are getting fuller each year we go along, and the merchants are sometimes getting concerned about people parking there and leaving their cars for the full day. So I think something that we should be addressing in the next couple of years is to get some downtown parking so people can park and walk about the village and do their shopping.
Anyone else? So I'm going to make a few comments because I was the one that brought this forward. And the reason why I brought it forward was because of many pictures that I've received that look like this one, where the residents are actually parking right across the sidewalk so that people cannot even walk down the sidewalks. The people that are in these places here cannot get into their own parking space at their home because the other trucks are blocking them. So that means no one's in their driveway because they all have to park on the streets. And so this should not be allowed to happen. And in all these houses here, there's also suites. So not only do the people have 2 cars in these homes, they also have the suites. So just on this one little area, I can see 7 vehicles. And they're all trucks. Well, 2 cars, 5 trucks. And they're huge. They're work trucks. And so there are continuous fights amongst the residents that live there and in a number of other areas. I got about 5 pictures from different areas throughout town where it kind of pits neighbor against neighbor because you're out for parking right out front of my house. I have nowhere to park. And I think that, and on this one as well, the actual fire truck went through this and they had to go out and turn their mirrors in on their trucks so that the fire truck could get through. Otherwise, it would have taken off all the mirrors. So we should not be allowing that to happen in our town. You may want a smaller carbon print, but this is not making people happy. This is causing more grief for so many people and hardships. And I agree that maybe in these smaller areas, we might have to have the line down the one side and say no parking on this side of the road and you can park on the other side. But something has to happen with this. And there's a good number of places that this is taking place in. So I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask myself. So on page 45, we have the parking regulations. And B states that for new buildings, structures, and uses, off-street parking spaces shall be required. So that says to me that you would have the pullouts where you can park in. But I have not seen that anywhere in town. Yes, please.
Through the chair, so that refers to parking on site based on the use. There's a chart, and I think that was included in here. Most every use has an associated parking requirement, and that has to be on the site. So that's just reiterating.
So when it says off-street parking?
Yeah, that means on-site. No, off-street means on the site. On-street would be on the street.
So off-street parking spaces must be laid out so as to permit vehicles access, so that when they back out, that they're not going onto a corner where a stop sign is or anything like that. That's happening in this picture here. So where the red truck is, it's a corner lot. So when they're backing right out into oncoming traffic. So that says that that shouldn't be allowed to happen either, right? And then so adequate provision shall, this is on page 47, it's number E, and its adequate provision shall be made for individual access to or from all parking spaces at all times by means of unobstructed maneuvering through the aisles, right? So is that for the small streets that everybody should be able to get into their own driveway? Because the complaints here are that no one, like they can't turn sideways to back in. They can't go forward to go into their driveway because it's blocked by the vehicles on the other side of the road. So no one can use their driveways.
Through the chair, when you read about maneuvering aisles in the zoning bylaw, it's usually referring to a parking lot, so where you have parking on both sides, the aisle that runs between, so not your driveway onto the street. The points you made, if I may, about the truck being parked at the corner, that's certainly something that's an easy solution, to have painted out the curbs of corners where there's a no parking zone, at least setback, and that actually is better for the fire trucks for their turning radius. Some also, regarding the commercial vehicles, some municipalities will have rules around commercial vehicles parking in residential areas, so people that are bringing home their work vehicles, that they're supposed to be on site. We don't have that regulation, but something to think about.
And with that one too, from where I lived previously, it was that you could park if you were 24-hour service and had to go. Otherwise, that no business vehicles would be parked there. My other question is on page 48, which is 4.8, which is the parking requirements, and that relates to the town core. So with that one, a good example would be on Air Road, where we put in the 10 townhouses there. And when that was going into place, when we were voting on that one, for downtown, they only needed 50% of parking. So they only needed 5 parking stalls for 10 homes. So that meant everybody else that were in those homes would be parking on the street because there's nowhere else to park. And that is a really busy road in that Air Manor's just down the road from that. So I personally do not agree with that. We're talking about no parking downtown, and now we're going to give 50% less to people who are developing there. That means that those people will be going and parking elsewhere throughout the village, I would think, like down the side of Otter Point probably, which is totally dangerous.
So the reduction is just something that an applicant or developer can take advantage of. It's not an automatic reduction. It's very common in town centers, urban centers, to allow the ability to reduce parking because it's supposed to be a more walkable area. You want people parking or taking transit and then walking around the town to getting all the shops. And most business revitalization zones support that concept because they want people to get out and get to their all of the business frontages. When they can't just drive right up to the fronts. But again, it's just an option. Planning doesn't automatically say you only have to do half. It's something they have the ability to take advantage of.
Thank you. So when you read this comment, though, to me it says that the following parking standards shall apply except where a property is located within the town center, in which case the standards below are reduced by 50%, right? So that was my final question. I think we have a real problem with parking, and I think we have a real problem with the width of our roads. And when the fire department says we can make it, but just barely, I don't think that is good enough. I think it should be a bit wider for everybody's safety, especially if there's people on the sides of the road. Anyone? Councillor St. Pierre?
This is just for clarification. Looks to me like we've got two problems. One is the pre-existing developments where there's insufficient parking, and it sounds like some of Councillor Beto's suggestions might be what we're looking for, or other means of actually dealing with the traffic snarl-ups that are running around corners. The other is to actually potentially make changes that would make Souk more friendly to cars. I don't know if I necessarily support that, but I do think that a shuttle service, and we're waiting for a transportation master plan, that might be better than increasing the size of the roads, just making better use of the road space that we have through better planning with transportation. So, just a thought.
Thank you. I would tend to agree, but when you cannot have a fire truck go down the road, then we have a problem, and this is bad. Councillor Loggins?
In terms of increasing the size of the roads, I can see where Councillor St. Pierre is going with this. I do also think that if we did it properly, increasing the road size is not necessarily a negative thing, because in an age where we need we need to have our fire trucks go down the road, it's also nice to have vehicles off the streets and have the sidewalks accessible so that they can be used properly, and have kids playing in the streets, like they in some, obviously they can't in all roads, but dead end streets or something like that. They can build a sense of community by having a safe place to be in front of their homes, where they're being watched and they can be with friends and family, for that neighborhood vibe. So I know it's not ideal, like you can do that in your backyard too, but it doesn't create that sense of community the same way. But right now, children are not able to do that because the roads aren't safe. So if we could start to repurpose our roads for different reasons and put up bylaws that would take those vehicles off the roads, that would probably be helpful. But I really did like how you separated that into two categories, because I think that's probably the direction that we need to head. Yeah.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I think another important thing is even with widening the streets, which I'm in favor of, it makes our community more livable. I mean, I understand we do have, some maybe one or two houses less in the area, but, when I go down these streets now, it's chock-a-block full. It's not somewhere where I want to live, and I think we have to make that livable for all our residents. So I'd be inclined to have a look at widening the streets. Thanks.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, like Councillor Beddoes, I did a drive around today too, sort of looking at the town from these perspectives, and I noted that older Souk does not have sidewalks, but the newer Souk does. For example, when you're along Beaton and you reach French Road North, the sidewalk begins and it carries on along Maple. So I think we're seeing some good new infrastructure being added, whereas in small towns everywhere, I suppose sidewalks were always who needed the sidewalk, right? You were sending a horse and buggy along it, yeah. We also, I guess, these parking neighbor feuds are everywhere. In North Van, there's quite a famous story a few years ago where on a busy, crowded street, a neighbor was going out with parking cones and reserving their particular spot, and that caused all kinds of problems. We do have bylaw enforcement here, and I think they're always ready and willing to get a phone call. So if people are in a situation with people blocking their driveways, we have a complaint-driven bylaw enforcement policy here, and so if bylaw receives 2 complaints, they will open a file and begin to investigate. I went out on a tour with one of the bylaw officers, and she plunked a tow-away sticker on a car that was parked in front of a fire hydrant. This was on a weekday, on a Monday. I'm not sure it was Monday, but this had been a very crowded streetscape as well. So there are actions that can be taken. And in terms of downtown parking, one of the councillors from the class of 2009, I believe it was, mentioned that along Townsend Road, on the west side of Townsend Road, between Wadhams and Souk Road, that there is room there for some angled parking along there. We're seeking some additional possible spots. And among the gang at the stick in the mud, the thought of the Tin Grotto keeps coming up. And given that land needs to be remediated, given its previous uses, popping a parking lot or a multi-level parking lot on that spot might be an option. Entirely dependent on the owners of the Tin Grotto and their willingness to, and our community vision as to be defined in the OCP. Also, if you go online and you just Google walkable communities, there's a growing understanding that widening roads, you build more roads, they fill up. And and we have a highway running through the heart of our town. So it's a tricky situation.
Ms. Campbell?
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to correct something about the 4.8. So where it says are reduced, so the requirements are reduced, but an applicant can choose to provide more if they can't force them to provide less. We just say you don't have to provide more than this amount. So
right.
Just to and a couple other small points. Like the hairs on my arms stood up when I'm hearing the wider roads. So I thought I had to cover. So I just wanted, I heard Councillor St. Pierre mention Economic Development Committee, and no doubt people putting their hands up to join that committee would be developers. And in terms of affordability of residential neighborhoods, when you ask them to dedicate wider roads, that cost is absorbed by the homeowner at the end of the day, so your taxpayers, and ultimately the district, because there's more paved surface we have to maintain. And the wider the road, the faster the traffic goes, more people park on it. It's just that the problem will never go away by widening a road. I think there is opportunities that Councillor Parkinson had pointed out that maybe for our existing communities, addressing it as fire lanes and the curb cuts. And as we go forward with our transportation master plan, looking at our road cross sections and requiring that fire access standards are embedded. And we are working with the fire chief on the transportation master plan, and they are already working on their own set of fire access standards that would be embedded in Bylaw 4.4 and the temporary or the transportation master plan. So I think there is a positive future ahead, but widening the roads is not the answer, and it's been proven wrong again and again for hundreds of years. Please don't do it.
Well, I don't definitely agree with this. And if we cannot fix this, and this happens everywhere, then something has to happen. Yeah. Less houses, whatever.
I think what I see.
There's no backyards here either. Yeah. When you talk about kids being able to play, there's no backyards at any of these places. The only place they can play is on that little stretch in the front of their house like this. So these kind of developments don't offer anything for the people.
Yeah. I think
and they're not affordable either.
What I see in the image is commercial vehicles parked on the street that can be restricted, parking on both sides, which we can restrict, a truck at the corner, which we can restrict. So there's solutions I see that could happen that don't involve widening.
And parking right across the sidewalk.
That one isn't on a sidewalk. The sidewalk's on the other side of the street.
Councillor Loggins.
No, that's an excellent point, and I think even if widening the road comes in the form of removing the excess vehicles from the street, so that like what we have currently can even be perceived as wider. Of course, then again, we do run into the traffic calming issues, but yeah, it's just such a huge huge issue. But even if we can consider widening in terms of getting vehicles off the street, that would be good.
Councillor Beddoes.
Well, let's move forward with some of those things that we've sort of almost agree on. We're going to be painting some lines somewhere along the lines and looking at some streets that may be parking on one side. That is not solving all the problems, but to me, we're heading in the right direction. Rather than do nothing, I'd like to see us at least get that done. future developments, we can debate whether how wide the streets are, but we have some real problems here now, and there's some solutions that you've mentioned. Let's act on them.
Councillor McMath?
I think that staff was like a massive project, so some things to help simplify that, just like you discussed, are some things that we agree on. So if they can give us a recommendation on what exactly a healthy cash in lieu would look like, creating or proposing a bylaw on your commercial work vehicles, and then also raising the minimum parking requirements on multifamily lots in particular. And then the rest of the stuff can sort of come after that. So, or we can have different people look at it. I think the first ones that I mentioned, you can pull up right away. Those are simple sort of general solutions. But for the target areas, those will be where the extensive work comes in for you guys. Yes.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get a hold of that motion.
It's just
Cash in lieu proposed bylaw on commercial and multifamily lot requirement for the staff.
Councillor, or Ms. Machado.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a reminder that Council will be fully engaged in the Transportation Master Plan that's coming up, and we can certainly provide a report on what these options could be, but I think would also be more fulsomely addressed through the Transportation Master Plan, and I think would encourage Council to wait for what that's going to look like.
Councillor Loggins?
Would it be possible, probably I'll ask first through you to staff, if we could do a friendly amendment to direct staff to consider these in the Transportation Master Plan as potential priorities?
And not a report.
Right.
Thank
Because
you.
I imagine it will come, I imagine it will come through that process, but perhaps these are just priorities that...
You okay with that?
Yes, it's very friendly.
I know, but she keeps doing it. We'll learn. Yeah.
We've had a suggestion from our head planner that anything else, things could be added to this list and would be gratefully accepted. So if anyone
Yes, of course.
wanted to fire it off.
And so, are there any more comments from council? So this was a motion that was made that is not supposed to be made just yet, and we are supposed to have public input first. So we will take the public input, but we'll leave that there, and if we have to revise it because of the public, we shall do that. May I please have public input now?
Thank you. That's why I was waving my arms. I know. So, as we've talked, every time a development comes up, I keep saying, what about the parking? What about the parking? And one of the places is Gatewood, where I was picking up my grandson. It was ridiculous. I had to drive up and back out because there were cars parked on the sidewalks. It's ridiculous. So, when you have smaller lots like that, or townhouses in particular, there should be back alleys so people can park in the back and not in the front. There's no space there. Another issue that when I served on the Board of Variance, which I found so ridiculous, is those tent lots that were built on such tiny lots. People could not park their little cars in the garages because the garages were too small, because the house was too small. They couldn't get furniture up there. So they had to park on the street, and when they parked on the street, they had to park on the sidewalk because there wasn't enough setback on the front yard. It would back onto municipal property. So their driveway was their cars are parked on the sidewalk. So those are issues that have to be dealt with immediately. And those small lots, they just don't work. Like you say, we had people coming forward to put a 10 by 10 playhouse in their backyard for setbacks. They couldn't put them in because their yard was too small. Ridiculous. I can't believe that those family lots. And as Councillor Parkinson said, the kids had no place to play. There was no place to play. There's no parking, or no place for the kids to go out and even put a chair in. Another issue too, of course, the back alleys, and another thought that I had too was the parking for boats and RVs. There should be storage units in every subdivision. They should have their own storage units for RVs and boats and for the stuff. So the stuff goes into storage units rather than into their garages, so they can park the cars in the garages. So those are just some things that I've noticed too, because when all those years of serving on the Board of Variance, and we go to every property, which I hope Council does too. You go to every property and you see what's going on. You talk to the people and you talk to the neighbors and you see what's going on. We really have to be very conscientious in what we're doing in our subdivision proposals. And for the downtown, I agree that's ridiculous with the 50% parking. You're building a house, you're building you're densifying that area, and cars we use cars. We go to town. We work in town. Most people do work in town, so they have to have cars. And to think that it's a walkable community, it isn't yet. We're just not there yet. We can work towards that. We can put the sidewalks in, but we have to provide parking. Thank you.
Jen Smith, 6805 Courts Drive. So on this one's a hard one because, as Mrs. Lewis was saying, we aren't there yet, but we need to be, right? So we need to get there. I think we can't have livable communities in Souk until we have more economic business. I don't know. I don't think overdeveloping and putting pressure on all our capacity is the answer to that. I mean, we keep growing multifamily developments and homes, but it's not generating new businesses that can service us. So it's a tough one, but in the same regard, staff is quite correct. I mean, we only have a certain amount of land, and the wider we make everything, and the more we build out, it's more expensive to service. So the principle behind the smart growth and encouraging higher density is a good one, and that's the one that looks after our environment on a higher scale. What I would suggest that you do that might help with your decision making is take a look at those areas that have the problems that you've identified, and ask staff to indicate whether that was a subdivision level change, whether that was actually what they were supposed to have built, or if it was a council change, or if that was the standard that they were supposed to apply at the time. Then maybe you'll be able to see what needs to be tweaked. In terms of still allowing higher density for builders and narrow roads, and yet the existing residents are the ones who you're going to make all these changes for, that makes it difficult, because so if you do have a legal suite and you have and you rent it out and they have a vehicle, and now you've reduced on that one street the amount of vehicles, even though you're allowed to have suites, you've reduced it on that one street to half now. So where the most people have to work in town in Victoria still, so where are they going to come from? So I don't have an answer. I just thought I'd mention those things, that it just seems a little unfair to the existing residents. the idea behind buying a place that doesn't have parking is supposed to be the people who will buy that won't be the people who will be commuting. So I guess, for it's a tough one. So I think the suggestion to work with it with the transportation plan is a good one. But in the meantime, identify why you're having those problem areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anybody else wishing to speak?
Britt Santowski, 2206 Church Road. I see it's a very complicated issue. One thing I've heard mentioned a lot around this table in different conversations is the idea of bringing in a shuttle bus. And there I think we have a great opportunity to learn from Langford, who brought in something like that as a tourist thing. And it was too expensive and they couldn't afford it, so I think that there could be lessons learned from there. When planning for parking in Souk in the commercial zone, Souk is not walkable, right? I get the not having, having a 50% reduction in parking when you're living in town, but for me that applies for a town that has public transit. And we do not. We have a bus that comes once every hour. We do have the little buses that go randomly, almost seemingly. If you're lucky enough to catch one from Sun River and go shopping, you really have to plan your trip home on the roundabout. If you're two people parenting living at home, even if one is staying at home, if you have kids, one partner's off working in Victoria, the other one is driving the kids to Sea Park, to the soccer games, to the baseball courts. All those things are not walkable. I think planning for a non-walkable town currently is not an option because Souk is not that. Economic development, boy oh boy, I would love to see that in Souk, because that would allow for more people to actually live here and work here. But again, that's kind of long-term stuff. I do like the idea of wider streets, but in the town core. I'm a person who is, I get anxious when I'm not following rules. So when there is a shopping mall that says for parking for customers only, and then I have to go from, say, this side of the road to that side of the road, I will drive it. This is public, right? I will drive it because the sign says this is only for paying customers. And like having somewhere where you could park, like even that we don't, the town is not walkable because it's all private parking. If we had, like I'm thinking Ladysmith, they have a very wide town core with angled parking down both sides. And then if you look at in Esquimalt, on their wider roads, they have pull-out parking with traffic calming going on in the middle. Right? So there's, I think, a great opportunity to plan for long-term. I think short-term zoning has to recognize that we're not walkable, not even close. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Santowski. Any other questions from anyone? Is there anything else that council would like to add for staff to consider at this moment? Or Councillor Better?
Yeah, just a comment from Ms. Smith, I believe it was, that said about if you block off, I take off one whole lane of traffic, that it crowded on the other side. But my experience has been to drive down these streets, I'm like a billiard ball. Go down, there's a car parked on the right side, and then you move over and each side of the street is not full. It's just that if we eliminate one side of the parking, we would fill up the other. But I don't think it'd be filling up to excess. I just think it would make it much easier to get through that neighborhood. Thanks.
Councillor Math?
I think she meant more that people need, like, of all these vehicles, like in this picture, they need to park there. So if you make it so that on one side of the street they can't park and it becomes illegal for them, where are they going to go? There's no room, clearly.
Excuse me, to the chair. Most of the subdivisions I've been down recently, and I drove them today, it wasn't so matter of it was all blocked up on one side. It was the fact that there was one here, one here, one here, and if they moved those over to the other side of the street, it looked to me like there was still lots of parking. So just utilize one side more and the other side less. That's my own personal.
Anyone else have any comments? So I'd just like to make one comment on the healthy cash in lieu parking contributions and what that actually means. When you talk about cash in lieu, we end up with no parking and we end up with some money. Would that money go towards building a parkade? Is that what the intention would be? Or like our affordable housing, it sits there and not really doing much with it at this time?
So typically, a municipality will have a calculation for cash in lieu based just on that for the municipality to provide usually like structured parking of some sort, not necessarily underground, but like a parkade for in the community center somewhere. And so the calculation would have like a market rate for construction at that time. You wouldn't actually put the dollar value so that it can be calculated based on the current rates at any given time.
Then I agree that would be a good idea. Anybody else have any comments? No one else? Yes?
Could I suggest maybe rewording that first bullet then to say define cash in lieu, like come up with a cash in lieu calculation?
That would be great. Thank you.
Health easy. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? So, Councillor St. Pierre?
I was thinking about this and wondering whether or not I should bring it up, but honestly, I don't know if I can not bring it up. And basically, it's really the climate change and the carbon reduction. I think as we plan for whatever we want to do, I happen to think that more parking in the downtown actually makes sense. Period. End of sentence. Just because it actually increases the walkability, because people can actually start walking at that point. So I think some parking actually makes sense, but I think that we need to be very, very careful, given that at this point. We're looking at wanting to decrease our carbon emissions by something like 50% at 12 years. And I would hate to be spending a lot of time and resources towards things that are actually going to increase those emissions. Potentially, we are looking at things like our children's future, and I think that needs to be considered at all times.
I just wanted to thank Council for this conversation. This is really helpful, and I wanted to leave something with you regarding the town centre, because I hadn't realized this conversation would go to the town centre. If parking is as needed as it is there, please keep in mind that the boundary of the town centre is set and limited. So if we want to increase parking in that area, you might keep in mind as we enter into the OCP stage, those boundaries should they extend into corridors or other areas so that we can provide, or developers can provide, commercial uses. It's just a
Thank you. Everyone's good? So I'd like to close this portion of our meeting. Is that correct? Or no new business, no notice of motion.
Wait, we do need to call the question on the motion.
Darn. Call the question. All in favor? Hello? Thank you. Obviously not a good idea. So, and there is no new business and there's no notice of motion tonight. And so I would like to ask for adjournment, and that we are going to be going back into a motion into in camera. Is that what I say? Just adjourn. Adjourn? And reconvene in camera. Thank you.